Hello, my name is David, and I'm a fourth-year PhD student at the University of Oxford. Today I will be presenting on the stratigraphy and eruptive history of Corbetti Caldera in the Main Ethiopian Rift. I would like to thank my supervisors and collaborators, as well as local guides for their help and contributions to this work. Corbetti sits within the Main Ethiopian Rift, which forms part of the wider East African Rift, connecting the Afar Depression in the north and the Turkana Depression and the Kenyan Rift to the south. Corbetti is located around 20 kilometres west of the populous town of Shashamene and around 15 kilometres north of the town of Awassa. It is estimated over 250,000 people live within 30 kilometres of Corbetti, with over 14,000 people estimated to live within the confines of the caldera itself. Corbetti has undergone the explosive and diffusive eruption of paracline rhyolites for the majority of its eruptive history. Previous work has dated the caldera-forming eruption to around 182,000 years ago, and since then 3 major post-caldera edifices have developed. R2 to the north, the oldest and most heavily eroded, Urji to the west, which erupts predominantly explosively, and Chabbi to the east, which erupts mainly large obsidian lavas. In addition, just outside the caldera sits a rhyolitic tuff cone known as the Biftu tuff cone. Understanding the eruptive history of Corbetti is critical to delimit the risk this volcano poses to local populations, especially in light of plans to construct a geothermal power plant within the caldera. During a 3.5-week field campaign, multiple sites were visited and systematically logged and sampled. One of the challenges in correlating units is their similarity in appearance in the field, high spatial variability in lithophases, and relatively homogeneous geochemistry. Eruptive compositions range between komandite and pantellerite and commonly overlap with other eruptive deposits, making it difficult to distinguish between units based on geochemistry alone. Despite this, correlations and stratigraphic order were interpreted based upon the presence of several distinct horizons, which were persistently observed throughout the caldera. The pre-caldera eruptive history at Corbetti is recorded within the northern, southern and western caldera walls. They are mainly comprised of large jointed rhyolite lavas. At some locations, these lavas are overlain by distinct packages of units which are not observed to the localities. One example, seen here in the field photo, comprises of multiple pumice fall and PDC deposits capped with an obsidian lava with a spatter-like texture. These highly localized deposits may record the formation of vents on what was the main edifice prior to the caldera forming eruption. We suggest that whilst the central vent may have been present at Corbetti, eruptions occurred at multiple small events across the pre-caldera shield, resulting in the highly localized deposits seen within the caldera walls today. Following the development of a low-relief shield, a caldera-forming eruption occurred, as is typical for large silicic systems within the Main Ethiopian Rift. Previous studies have highlighted the presence of a welded ignimbrite outcropping above the jointed rhyolite lavas in the western caldera wall. This unit has been interpreted as the deposits from a caldera-forming eruption and dates to around 182,000 years. We find evidence of this red ignimbrite, as well as a green welded ignimbrite and a previously undocumented sequence of topographically controlled lithic lag breccias. These breccias are of particular interest as they contain abundant clasts of a red welded ignimbrite. Whilst the sequence of events surrounding the caldera-forming eruption remains unclear due to limited exposures, we propose the red ignimbrite was emplaced first, followed by 2 granular PDCs which deposited the lithic lag breccias in a paleo valley. The emplacement of the green welded ignimbrite occurred after the deposition of the lithic lag breccias, as no fragments of this green ignimbrite were observed within the breccia themselves. However, it is uncertain if this occurred during the same phase of activity or was a distinct event. Following the caldera-forming eruption, numerous vents developed within the caldera. Their location is strongly controlled by the presence of 2 pre-existing faults related to the early stages of rift development in the region. These vents erupted both explosively and effusively to build up the 3 main post-caldera edifices we see today. Pumice cones are commonly seen at Corbetti, and this style of eruption is also documented at Aluto, with eruptions following a consistent sequence. Eruptions typically begin with the deposition of coarse proximal pumice deposits before the development of a sustained plume. This plume has frequent localized collapse events generating dilute pyroclastic density currents, some of which are interbedded with the pumice fall deposits as seen here in the photo. Finally, the eruption terminates with the extrusion of a lava flow. 2 of the most well-characterized eruptions have occurred on Urji. the bedded pumice eruption and the Wendo Koshe younger pumice or WKYP eruption. These two eruptions generated widespread pumice fall deposits and are consistently seen throughout the caldera. The bedded pumice unit is a diffusely stratified pumice fall deposit, occasionally interbedded with thin beds of dilute pyroclastic density currents. The WKYP has been extensively studied, and carbon dating of an underlying paleosol has constrained the timing of the eruption to less than 2.3 thousand years ago. The eruption has been interpreted to be VEI5 and deposited pumice over 25 kilometres from the vent, and is one of Corbetti's largest documented eruptions. Both of these eruptions are thought to be sourced from Urji. The exposures on the flanks of the most recent cone on Urji, the Wendo Koshe cone, shown here on the map, shows the characteristic sequence of the bedded pumice unit, suggesting the cone was formed during this eruption. This is supported by the fact that the bedded pumice unit shows the characteristic architecture of a pumice cone forming eruption. However, previous work has suggested that the WKYP erupted from the Wendo Koshe cone and resulted in the collapse of the northern flank. This suggests two possible scenarios. Either both eruptions occurred from the same vent after a period of quiescence, or the Wendo Koshe cone actually records the remains of two distinct vents which opened in close proximity to each other. We propose that the second scenario is more likely, as we see multiple examples across both Urji and Chabbi of vents opening in close proximity and giving the appearance of a singular vent. In addition to compiling the stratigraphy of Urji, we've been able to compile a relative chronology of Chabbi using satellite images and previous studies mapping the deposits. The early part of Chabbi's history was dominated by pumice cone eruptions, the remains of which can be seen on the northern and eastern flanks of the edifice. Previously, 4 major lavas had been identified, CO3 to CO6. However, we have been able to determine that CO4 actually comprises of 2 distinct lavas, and we have identified 2 small lava deposits overlying CO5, as highlighted in the animation. Another vent of interest is the Biftu Tuff cone, which sits just outside of the caldera walls. Large dilute PDC deposits of this rhyolitic tuff cone were observed on the northwest shore of Lake Hawassa. Contained within portions of this unit were reworked shells which were collected and carbon dated to around 7,131 years, providing a constraint on the age of the Biftu cone eruption. Oxygen isotope values of the shells, which, when compared to paleoclimate estimations, indicates the eruption occurred during a high stand period at Lake Hawassa. In conclusion, we have been able to compile a comprehensive composite stratigraphy for activity at Corbetti and are able to approximate a recurrence rate over the last 2.3 thousand years of one eruption every 300 to 400 years. We have placed a constraint on the age of the Biftu cone forming eruption and proposed evidence for the formation of the Wendo Koshe cone. Corbetti is also seen to have a high propensity to generate dilute, highly localized PDCs. The frequency with which these deposits are seen within the caldera highlights their significant hazard for any future eruptions. Therefore, we recommend further investigation of the PDC-related hazard, especially considering plans to develop a geothermal power plant within the caldera. Thank you very much for listening, and I welcome any questions you may have.